Hi, folks. This is Don Meissner with Linda with the North Country Fishing Report. And Linda, you had one other topic you wanted to talk about this week.
Well, one of the things that I had researched, and again, it was a Field and Stream article. I seem to find those fascinating. This was timeless fishing skills, and I was just wondering if there are any fishing skills that you could relate to the listeners, in terms of anything about how to catch a fish, but in terms of a skill that you learned that would still be apropos now for young people wanting to learn how to fish.
Well, it's interesting. What they talk about in this article is they're really talking about how some old-fashioned techniques never change. They're still, in fact, they talk about old-fashioned carved fishing lures and how they still would work as well today as they did back then. Remember, fish haven't changed that much. They've just evolved like we do, and they adapt to their new surroundings and their new situations in the environment. But some of these fish back then were no easier to catch than they are today, and some of these lures that people would carve out of cedar or balsa wood that was easy for them to form with a knife were, how do I want to put this? They were so attractive, and they were unavoidable by the fish. The fish couldn't help themselves. They wanted to strike out at that. And those lures would still work today. And there's people today carving some really fascinating lures. We have people in our area making their own lures, and that is something that never changes. If you can make what you're using, I think the rewards of catching a fish on it are far greater than going to a store and buying something. And what I'm getting at is if you tie your own flies, you can create, it's like an artist working on a piece of paper, and they can create just about anything that their mind can see or their mind can imagine.
We've actually seen some beautiful lures that were tied by folks that we know.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Aaron Hardy, one of our trout guides now, is trying to teach people how to tie flies as well, because I guess it isn't as difficult as people might think. And it's something that anybody can do. And the fun in finishing tying that fly, there's people that are so good at this that they can be out with their waders on in the middle of a river with the water rippling down beside them, and they can be looking out and they can see the flies that are coming off the water different than what they thought they should use. And so they can actually, with their hands and whatever, tie a fly right there on the spot. This just...
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating. People don't realize this. It's something that you can take your craft with you right out to the water.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. But that's essentially what this whole article is about, how some of these old-fashioned techniques, and you asked me about a skill that never changes. Well, I guess the very first thing I learned was the patience and the ability to watch my line, even as a kid. I'm talking about as a little kid, and know that something was happening under the water by what I could see and feel, and watching to see if my line twitched or did anything. And that's part of the skill that we use today in fishing. If we're using plastic worms in particular, that's a slow way of fishing. And when a fish bites it, we can actually sense them picking it up by watching the line that we're using. If we have the right kind of line, you can see it twitching and wiggling on the water, and you can actually feel through the line. This is a skill that I learned as a kid, and it's a very important part of fishing. It's using our whole sense of perception, our touch, our ears, our nose, the same thing that fish do. They respond by all these different commands that enter them, the things that they smell in the water. And we've got videos that you remember that we show of a muskie coming up behind the lure and opening its mouth and kind of chattering its teeth without taking it in.
Yes.
And people see that, and they marvel. What is that muskie doing? And I say the same thing to sort of lead them along. Now watch this muskie. What is he doing right now? It acts like he's tasting the water where the lure's going through. But
and essentially that's what they are doing.
Yes.
Is getting the sense of what is this that I'm chasing? Is it something that I want to eat?
The other skill I think that I learned as a kid that never changes is, knowing in the environment that you're in what lives in that environment and what those fish might be eating on. When I grew up on the Genesee River, I would go out there and pick up rocks to be able to find crayfish because I knew the fish can do the same thing. They can wait around next to those stones and they can see those crayfish come out, and that's a wonderful meal for them. In case we forget, we think that gobies are the prime food for fish in our area.
The delicacy.
Yeah, but thank you for the words. But in truth, crayfish have always been a fish favorite. And I don't care what species we're talking about. Every species of fish seems to love crayfish. And it's the same thing when I would pick rocks over. I would look and I could see grubs that attached to the material under the rock and put those grubs on, and the fish would eat them because they were food that they knew was part of their diet. And the other thing was hellgrammites. Hellgrammites, we talk about them now, plastic hellgrammites to fish for bass. But I'll tell you what, if I could find hellgrammites and pick them up and put them in something where I could, in my bait bucket or whatever, but what people don't realize, hellgrammites are a little tiny form, and they have little pinchers at the end of their nose, and those pinchers can pinch worse than the biggest crayfish I've ever had. They're terrible. But trout love those hellgrammites too.
Do they?
If I would hook one on and throw it out there, I was sure I was going to catch a fish. Everyone loved hellgrammites that lived in that water. But that's another important part of fishing that you can learn as a kid and is never changed. Is learning how to feel when a fish is nearby, and how to pick the right kind of foods to use for bait. That's how we go in a store and we pick the soft plastic baits that we want. We sort of think back to what did we see fish eating in the water when we've been fishing, and we try to replicate that to the soft plastic.
That's wonderful.
So, and the other thing, one of our people in our North Country, Jeff Chudinski.
Yes, Jeff Chudzinski, and his dad now makes musky lures. They're beautiful.
Yeah, and we've taken them to the sports shows to let people see what the type of lures. Obviously, we have muskies in our water, and they're going to want something bigger, and they like, and so the lures that people choose for muskie fishing often are different than what you choose for other fish. And these lures that Jeff's father makes are absolutely gorgeous, handmade, really heavy-duty spinners, and with beautiful bucktails on them. And we have people in our area that are making baits like this, and it's important that we recognize them and try to help them in any way we can.
Yes.
That's our role, you and my role.
Yes.
In trying to promote what we have.
Because,
so anyway, that's a long-winded answer to how things, old-fashioned skills remain the same. That old saying that things never stay the same. We've been staying when we do the sports shows in a motel, and you commented on the fact that motels used to have pen and paper out there for people in their rooms.
Yes.
But you don't see that now. And it's because people don't write down stuff the same as they once did. They have their phone and they do their thing. But remember, in fishing, things do stay the same. You don't have to discover a whole different thing. Technology is helping us discover a whole different thing. That's a whole other topic that we talk about endlessly, about how new technology is changing the face of fishing.
But the tried and true remains tried and true.
The same. And old timers resist this change because there was a lot of fun in being able to go out there and determine what you're going to do without looking at a graph, to look at the water and be able to read the water. You asked me about old-time skills. That's one of the biggest skills a person can develop, and it's no different than it was years ago, looking in that water and saying, wow, that looks like a great spot to fish right there. It's an endless skill. Until next time, folks, this is Don and Linda with the North Country Fishing Report.